Have you ever stopped to truly consider what makes a villain really haunting, long after the game ends? Is it just raw power that kind of fades, doesn't it? Or maybe sheer cruelty, which can sometimes feel a bit flat looking back? Or is it maybe something, I don't know, more human, something recognizable but twisted?
It's interesting you bring that up. Just a few sessions back, my group encountered this antagonist. On the surface, seemed pretty standard. Raiding villages, taking stuff, being a general problem. The initial motivation looked like simple greed, gold supplies, that sort of thing. But as we dug into his backstory a bit more, we found out it wasn't just about getting rich. He was actually leading this displaced community. See, they'd lost their land. And the raids, they're like this desperate move to get enough resources for his people to survive the winter. That underlying need, that responsibility he felt, even though he used violence, it gave him this weight, made him more than just an obstacle, made our choices as players feel a lot more complicated.
Oh, yeah. That complexity, right? That sense of a real driving force, something beyond just being the bad guy. That's exactly what we're getting into today. We've been looking at this really useful piece from LitRPG Reads. It's called 100 Villain Motivations for DMs Who Need Enemies with Real Goals. And the core idea, really, is that the villains who stick with you, the ones that make the game memorable, they're driven by something real, their goals, their history. That's what makes them feel alive and shapes the whole game world for you.
Yeah, and what's great about this article is how it organizes things. It gives DMs a kind of framework, helps you think about why a villain does what they do. It groups 100 different motivations into 5 main categories: selfish, idealistic, vengeful or reactive, cosmic or supernatural, and strategic or political. Think of them as different lenses, ways to build antagonists with more depth than just evil for evil's sake.
Okay, let's start with those selfish motivations. So these are characters driven mostly by personal gain, right? Like they want gold, power, maybe just luxury, or fulfilling some immediate desire. It's all about them.
Right. And the article points out these villains often act with a lot of confidence, maybe even arrogance. But that self-interest, that can actually be a weakness players might exploit. One example from the list is the villain who seeks riches at any cost, even if that means breaking every law or trust in the land. Something like that immediately throws up questions for the players. You try to reason with them, beat them to the punch. It makes you think about your own lines, Where do you draw them?
And another one in that selfish vein is the villain obsessed with acquiring a rare object or artifact, convinced it will change their life forever. That brings in a whole layer of mystery, doesn't it? What's so special about this thing? What deep-seated need is the villain trying to fill with it? Suddenly, it's not just stopping a thief. It's about uncovering the story behind this object.
Exactly. And then you've got the one who hungers for fame, wants their name to outshine all legends no matter who must fall. That kind of drive can create really interesting tension if the player characters are also seeking renown. How do you deal with someone willing to achieve fame through, well, completely ruthless actions? Makes you define heroism. The article also notes, smartly I think, that sometimes you can appeal to their ego, or maybe even bribe them. Their selfishness can be their undoing.
All right, let's shift gears. What about idealistic motivations? This is quite different. These are the villains who genuinely believe they're right. They think they're working for some greater good. They have this strong conviction, this vision, even if their methods are pretty extreme.
Yeah, these are often the ones that pose the biggest moral puzzles for players because sometimes their goals might actually sound reasonable at first glance. Take the villain who fights for law and order, convinced their strict regime will prevent greater chaos. Okay, maybe chaos is bad, players might agree with that, but then they see the oppression, the lack of freedom, it forces you to weigh security against liberty. Really difficult stuff.
Another strong example is the one who seeks to purge corruption through any means, no matter the cost in innocent lives. This really shows the danger of extremism, even if it starts from a place you might understand. How do you even argue with someone so convinced of their own purity that they'll cause immense suffering for it?
And then there's the motivation to unite warring factions under a single banner for their own good. Again, peace sounds good on paper, but how is this unity achieved? Often through manipulation, maybe force, suppressing cultures. It makes players question the price of imposed harmony. These idealistic types really force you as a player to confront some messy ethical dilemmas.
Okay, moving along. Let's talk about vengeful or reactive motivations. So here, the driving force is usually some past pain, right? Betrayal, loss.
Yeah.
Something bad happened to them. They're not necessarily after power or ideals. They're lashing out, trying to settle a score.
Exactly. And these motivations can feel very relatable, which makes them powerful. We all understand wanting justice or payback when we feel wronged, but these villains let that pain twist them, consume them. Think about the example: lost a loved one and blames the heroes or their organization for the tragedy.
Absolutely. And sometimes the thing that sparked it all wasn't even that huge objectively. Like the villain sworn to avenge a personal humiliation suffered in public.
Yeah.
It just shows how powerful things like pride or shame can be, how they can fuel this really intense hatred. Villainy doesn't always need a world-ending catalyst, does it?
Not at all. And then you have the one who was once wrongfully punished, now seeks revenge against all authority. This taps into themes of justice, corruption. What happens when the system fails someone? And these vengeful types often become recurring enemies, right? Their story gets tangled up with the player's actions and choices. Maybe the players even feel a bit responsible.
Okay, next up, cosmic or supernatural motivations. Now we're getting into the really big picture stuff. We're talking about villains driven by gods, ancient curses, eldritch beings, things beyond normal human grasp.
Right, and these motivations immediately raise the stakes. They often feel vast, almost incomprehensible, like the villain tasked by a god to enact a divine plan indifferent to mortal consequences. How do you even begin to deal with that? Bargain with a god's chosen? Reason with someone who sees mortals as insignificant? It often demands really creative, outside-the-box thinking from the players.
Yeah, the scale just explodes. Another really evocative one is the villain, bound by an ancient curse, must perform forbidden rituals to stave off disaster or unleash it. This adds a layer of tragedy, maybe. The villain might not even want to do these things. They could be trapped by fate, forced into terrible choices. It raises questions about free will, destiny.
Definitely. And what about the one who seeks forbidden knowledge that will unravel reality itself? That plays on a very deep fear, the fear of tampering with things best left unknown. What happens when you pull at the threads of existence? What horrors might be unleashed? These cosmic villains often make you feel like you're facing something truly ancient, powerful, and maybe fundamentally alien.
Okay, last category. Strategic or political motivations. These are the manipulators, the schemers. They're after power, but usually through cleverness, control of information, political games. Often working behind the scenes, yeah.
Precisely. These are the chess masters, playing the long game. They rarely like a direct fight. They build networks, pull strings, use others as pawns. Consider the villain who seeks to usurp the throne or place a puppet ruler on it. That throws the players right into the middle of court intrigue, hidden plots, maybe even civil unrest.
Right. It becomes less about combat prowess and more about navigating tricky social situations, uncovering secrets. Another great example is the villain who controls a network of spies, assassins, or thieves for information and power.
That kind of enemy is tough because they could be anywhere, know anything. Creates this constant feeling of paranoia, of being watched. And then there's the really cunning one who plays rival factions against each other to remain essential as a peacekeeper. They deliberately sow chaos just so they can seem like the only one who can fix it, maintaining their own power. Dealing with these strategic villains often means players have to think politically, strategically themselves. It's a different kind of challenge. And, the article rightly says these categories aren't rigid. The best villains often mix motivations. Maybe they start vengeful, but then get a taste for political power. Their goals can shift, especially based on what the players do. Makes them feel much more dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, what this article from LitRPG Reads really drives home is that giving your villains clear, understandable motivations. That's key. It makes the story richer, the encounters more meaningful, and creates those villains you actually remember years later.
And we definitely want to give a shout out to Ken Chan, who wrote this fantastic article over at LitRPG Reads, and also to Paul Bello, a fine fellow indeed for putting together such a practical resource for DMs. Really useful stuff.
So we're curious now, what about you? Think about the villains that have really stuck with you from your games. What was driving them? What made them so memorable? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear those stories.
And here's a final thought to chew on. Consider the heroes you play. Your own characters. What could happen? What twist of fate or shift in belief could nudge them towards a villainous path? Maybe, just maybe, the seeds of the most compelling antagonists are hiding inside the best of us.